welcome our speaker.
Going to
go ahead. Yeah, go ahead and get your slides up.
screen.
All right. Good morning, everybody, and welcome. We're really glad you're here and glad that you have taken the time to join us this morning. I am happy and excited to introduce my colleague, Dr. Charles Geier. We call him Chuck, and he is going to talk to us today about kind of some of the new things that we know about adolescent neurodevelopment research, and he's going to give us some new information, and I'm going to let him do more of an introduction of who he is and what he does. If you have questions, if you have clarifications, anything like that, go ahead and put them in the chat. If it's a clarification question on something that he's talking about, we'll address it quickly. If it's more of a discussion kind of a question, we'll save those and save those for discussion at the end. At the end, I will also drop a link into the chat for you all to complete a survey. If you need a certificate, that will be your way to request a certificate as well. So again, thanks everybody for being here. Chuck, thank you for joining us, and I will hand over the mic to you.
Okay, well, thank you, Diane. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with everyone. And just as a quick, I can see a few cameras. Just are folks able to hear me clearly? Can you give me a thumbs up? Okay, perfect. Yeah, so good morning. My name is Charles Geier, Chuck Geier. I am a professor in human development and family science here at the University of Georgia. I am also the Associate Dean for Research in the College of Family and Consumer Sciences, and also the Associate Director for a new center here on campus called the Georgia Center for Developmental Science. So I wear a couple different hats here on campus, and I'm going to be speaking with you today about something that is, sort of near and dear to my heart and has been for a long time, and that is research in a field called developmental cognitive neuroscience. It is a multidisciplinary field that focuses on the links between brain development and behavior and context, and it's a very exciting time to be in developmental cognitive neuroscience, and hopefully I'll be able to get some folks excited about this area too. So I'm going to be talking more specifically about some of the more contemporary challenges and findings in this work. So a little bit about me, sort of like my research interests per se. So I'm very interested in understanding changes in the brain, particularly in systems underlying our ability to process rewards, our sort of thinking and cognitive control abilities, and how these systems interact, and how these changes support behavior during the adolescent period, and how these changes shape and are shaped by the environment in which individuals grow up. I'm particularly interested in things like habit formation, decision-making, risk and resilience, and in particular, risky decision-making. So I wanted to start the talk today with a little bit unconventionally here, and I wanted to give you a kind of a quick demonstration, right? So I want you to, if you would, imagine that you are behind the wheel of a car, right? Your task is essentially to drive down this stretch of road as quickly as you can, right? Stopping as few times as possible. Along the way, you're going to encounter several intersections, right? As one would on a long road. And these intersections have stoplights at them. So at some intersections, the stoplight is green, so you just speed on through. Sometimes it's red, you have to wait. Other times it's yellow, right? And you have to make a choice. Do you slow down and wait for the light to turn red and then eventually green again, right? Which is of course the safe option, right? But it's going to cost you time. Remember, you're trying to get to the end of this road as quickly as possible, right? So, what would you do, right? And I think there are some folks that would punch it, right, and go through this intersection. Other folks that might be a bit more cautious, right? This is a fairly, common situation for, a lot of us who are drivers, right? It's also, interestingly, the basis for a really sort of classic set of experiments aimed at helping us understand adolescent behavior better, right? And particularly their risk-taking behaviors. So there's some fairly well-known scientists, Larry Steinberg and Jason Chine and colleagues at Temple University in Pennsylvania, had a simulation task like this in an fMRI scanner, right? So participants were of different ages. So they brought in adolescents, they brought in young adults, and they brought in older adults. And they asked them to perform this task, right? And it was essentially, as I described, there was a start. They were viewing the scene that I just showed you, and they encountered a bunch of intersections, right? And they had to make a decision on each of these intersections, whether to stop or go, right? Again, the goal was to get to the end as fast as possible. If you stopped, there was a delay, right? So you're delayed from your end goal. If you went, you could either, on some trials, on some intersections, you would be fine. You could make it through. On other trials, you would crash, right? And the screen would show this like shattered windshield, right? And there was a long delay in the task. Now, as I mentioned, adolescents, young adults, and adults, older adults were put in this situation, right? And a very sort of clever manipulation in this task was that Steinberg and colleagues had people watching the people in the scanner do this task, right? So they had the adolescents, the young adults, and the older adults bring in a friend, right, and watch them perform this task. Now, what's really interesting about this is that when performed sort of in isolation by themselves with nobody watching, adolescents, adults, and young adults all performed about the same. They made about the same amount of risky decisions, across the three groups. However, when there was a peer watching them, right, the adolescents made significantly more risks. They chose to sort of punch it through those intersections, right, the yellow light, and encountered more consequences, more risk, right? They saw that shattered windshield, right? And so what I'm showing you here is on the y-axis is the number of crashes that they observed for adolescents in red, young adults in green, and adults in blue. So again, when they're alone, they're about the same. When they're in this sort of heightened state with friends watching them, that's when we really see sort of the adolescents making more mistakes, right? Or making riskier decisions, I should say. Right? Now, I mentioned this was a task that was conducted in the scanner. So there's actually like a little video screen that people are watching in the scanning environment as they're performing this. And so the investigators were also collecting brain data at this time. So they're trying to understand which areas of the brain are active, during these different phases of task, and particularly during these decisions, whether to go or to stop at the intersection. And what they found was really interesting. So I'm showing you here in the upper panel some images of brains, right, sort of cut at different slices. And the point the area where I'm highlighting with my cursor in the sort of the yellow or the orange red, right? These are what's referred to as activation. So these are areas of the brain where it is sort of significantly engaged, right? And what these investigators found was that areas such as the ventral striatum and the orbital frontal cortex were more engaged in the adolescents during decision making when they were being watched by peers compared to the young adults and the adults. Now, what's really interesting about this is that these areas, the orbital frontal cortex and the ventral striatum, are areas that are have been known for some time to be really important in terms of processing rewards and integrating rewards into ongoing behavior, right? And so what sort of collectively, what Steinberg and colleagues kind of showed us so powerfully here is that adolescents aren't universally reckless, right? Instead, it's sort of better to kind of think of them as contextually reckless, right? And especially like around peers, when somebody is watching them, right? If their friend is watching them, it sort of drives these reward processes in the brain, and it causes them to sort of take more risks, right? So Steinberg's study was just this is one study that was sort of one of many that was kind of coming out at the same time, but it really was like a kind of a turning point in the study of adolescence and understanding how the brain contributes to adolescent behavior, right? It sort of moved scientific understanding away from like thinking about risk taking as like a cognitive deficit or just sort of like straight impulsivity, and moved it towards a space where people were thinking about it more in the context of rewards and multiple brain systems interacting together, and where brain function and behavior is strongly guided and shaped by context, in particular social context, right? Um, and it really this sort of collective understanding about multiple brain systems and context, and sort of the complexity underlying behavior really sort of helped sort of shape and establish the modern field of developmental cognitive neuroscience, right? And this sort of perspective that understanding adolescence really requires this multidisciplinary, multiple method approach. Right? Okay, so so in my talk today, I'm hoping to kind of give you this sort of contemporary perspective on adolescent neurodevelopment through the lens of developmental cognitive neuroscience. I'm going to start off by talking, sort of giving some background and some fundamental information about adolescence as a developmental stage, um, and hopefully convince you of its sort of uniqueness and importance in understanding human behavior. And then I'll move on to some fundamental studies related to structural and functional brain development as it pertains to adolescence. And then I'll close with talking about some contemporary sort of models and frameworks to help us understand adolescent behavior, some of the key research areas that are sort of driving the work currently, and then some sort of current and future trends that I see for the field. So first start with this adolescence as a unique developmental period, right? So I like to sometimes start my talk by saying like, these are the organisms that I study, right? It sounds very biological and scientific, right? But adolescence, right? It is a really, really interesting time of development. It is a period of quite rapid change across multiple domains. So in biological, psychological, social changes, right? That really sort of marks the transition from childhood to adulthood. One of the really sort of fascinating things about adolescence, from my perspective, and is that the onset of adolescence is often marked by biological changes, right? By the onset of puberty. The offset or the ending of adolescence is this sort of transition to adult roles in society, right? So our sort of very definition of adolescence, right, spans sort of multiple disciplines, right, from biological to social to psychological and so forth, and cultural, and so forth, right? So the age ranges that are typically associated with adolescence, they vary a little bit, but they're typically they're often considered to be sort of in the range of like around 10 or so to like the early 20s, right? So a decade or more during of transition, if you will, right? In for this developmental stage, right? In many aspects, adolescence is an extremely healthy period of our life, right? As I mentioned, we see, rapid change, we see rapid growth and improvements in physical health, in our sort of ability to think, to think abstractly, to problem solve, to reason, right? We show improved ability to sort of control our behavior across contexts, right? So it's a time when there's growth and sophistication and maturation, right? It's also a time where we observed heightened sensation and novelty seeking, increased sensitivity to rewards, particularly rewards that are associated with like peers and social contexts, right? And consequently, increase in these sort of risky or risk-taking behaviors, right? Now, risk-taking behaviors in adolescence sometimes gets a bad rap, right? This is like I think when we think of risk-taking behaviors, we kind of think about like situations like here in the bottom, right? The the sort of will my head fit there perspective that some adolescents have, right? And indeed, it's true, right? The negative consequences of some risk, excuse me, some risky behaviors can be quite bad, right? Substance use, crashes, burns, you know, there definitely are negative consequences that can occur. And interestingly, there's been some reports that during the adolescent period, there's a nearly 200% increase in morbidity and mortality rates, which is sometimes referred to as the health paradox of adolescence, right? This idea that adolescence is generally a healthy time, but we're also seeing these injuries and sometimes deaths, that are behaviorally driven, right? So, maladaptive risk-taking is certainly, a concern. However, it's important to keep in mind that, that not all adolescents take these like really dangerous risks, right? Not all adolescents engage in drugs. Not all adolescents get into a car with a drunk friend, right? So forth. There are also sort of adaptive aspects of risk taking, right? So things like asking a potential mate out for a date, right? Trying out for student council or a group, putting yourself out there sort of in high school, right? This idea that that these sort of natural risk-taking tendencies can be positive or sometimes negative, right? So it's a really interesting time, right? And a good portion of what developmental cognitive neuroscientists think about is how we can sort of steer adolescents towards these sort of healthy risks, right? And away from the more negative sort of maladaptive risks. Another important, there's a quick question. It says, adaptive and maladaptive are have completely opposite influences, contextually speaking. Can be, right? So like social influences is one example, right? That could be both sort of adaptive and maladaptive, right? So an individual, might want to, seek out new friends, new social situations, in the context of peers, but it could also sort of heighten, in some contexts, it could also heighten their the probability that they might engage in sort of more dangerous behaviors, right? Yeah, thank you. Good question. Here we go. Another sort of consideration, for the importance of adolescence, right, is that adolescence is a time when many mental health disorders either emerge or intensify. right? So this is a figure that was taken from a recent review article um, that that essentially talks about the sort of the age of onset for various types of conditions across age range. So this is a meta-analytic proportion, so it's looking across multiple studies and sort of finding common ground. And so we see, in these ages of 10 to, the mid-20s, OCD, substance use, eating disorders, mood disorders, anxiety, depression, personality disorders, schizophrenia. These are all conditions that that either sort of have their onset or their intensification during the adolescent period, right? Just like the risk-taking behaviors, right? There are also sort of health-promoting type of behaviors that can emerge and intensify during adolescence, right? So establishing routines like sleep and exercise, nutritional patterns, eating patterns, right? Developing coping skills like mindfulness and these other types of micro skills, pro-social engagement. So, there's sort of adolescence is sort of a time of kind of contradictions in some ways, right? There's negative things and there's positive things, right? Um, so you know, so adolescence is truly sort of this really important, critical window of development for lots of different reasons, right? Behaviorally, brain structure wise, and so forth. There's a lot going on at this time, right? Um, and scientific sort of inquiry into sort of the root causes of these issues, right? Um, really sort of tend to focus on brain development, right? And sort of influences on brain development during the adolescent period, right? Um, and so, this sort of dynamics that we've been talking about really sort of position adolescence as sort of a time of vulnerability, but also a time of unique opportunity, right? To help shape long-term sort of trajectories of health and well-being, right? And so, for this reason, studying adolescence through this developmental cognitive neuroscience lens it is extremely valuable, right? Again, developmental cognitive neuroscience is a newish field, but it's a very highly interdisciplinary field that combines psychology and neuroscience and biology and genetics and medicine and psychiatry and sociology. And there's a lots of different sort of it's the intersection of multiple fields, right? Um, the field examines how changes in the developing brain give rise to a host of sort of internal and externally observed behaviors, cognition, emotion, behavior across the lifespan. One of the interesting sort of aspects of developmental cognitive neuroscience is that there's been a lot of sort of methodological advancement that has sort of paralleled growth of the field and sort of paralleled, or in some cases, sort of spurred growth in the field. One of the major areas, major methodological advances that have sort of promoted the development of cognitive neuroscience and developmental cognitive neuroscience is functional neuroimaging of the brain, right? So functional neuroimaging utilizes an MRI scanner and essentially allows us to see and assess sort of which areas of the brain are engaged or active during particular behaviors or during particular contexts, right? And so, a typical brain imaging study might produce results like this, where there are sort of these highlighted areas, right? These areas of activation that in whatever context this brain is experiencing, were engaged like to do a task or to think about, something in this context, right? So this is the way it does this is based on blood flow, right? So as neurons in your brain are active, they require more blood and more oxygen, more nutrients, right? We can kind of take advantage of this and detect which areas are showing the most sort of the most sort of shunting of blood, right? fMRI in this sort of activation type of imaging is one of kind of many different techniques to help us sort of understand the active brain. So in fMRI and functional MRI, we're looking at like changes in blood flow, changes in blood oxygenation. We can also use MRI machines to detect structural development, structural change in the brain. So this middle image here is an image from a type of imaging called diffusion tensor imaging, where we can actually track like myelinated tracts in the brain, right, and identify them and compare across individuals and across groups, right? But excuse me, and there are also methods where we can look at sort of electrical signaling in the brain, right? And these various methods have various pros and cons. Some have increased spatial resolution, some have increased temporal resolution, and developmental cognitive neuroscientists often use sort of multiple methods to sort of triangulate down on what exactly is happening in the developing brain. There was a question in the chat that asks, can you touch on why these techniques are described as non-invasive? So they're non-invasive, like MRI machines are non-invasive because literally the people are just lying on a bed and we're taking images, snapshots of their brain, right? It does not require the injection of any kind of like radioactive isotope or or anything like that. It's just we're looking at sort of natural blood flow and oxygenation changes in the brain. Excuse me. Things like EEG, where we're looking at the electrical signaling, also is non-invasive. I mean, the extent to which non-invasive includes having this sort of net over your head, right? But it's not like, and nothing is entering the body, right? Nothing is no samples are being taken from the body itself, or nothing is being injected or inserted into the body, right? And MRI is one part of this question is which technique is most commonly used and sort of what about safety. MRI has been extensively used in developmental cognitive neuroscience. It's extremely safe. It's an extremely safe method for taking pictures of the brain. There's no radiation. There's no nothing injected. It's really just uses a combination of magnets basically to detect contrast in oxygenated versus deoxygenated blood. So MRI has and fMRI has really been sort of the predominant method in developmental cognitive science. But again, many scientists also sort of use a combination of different tools to help them understand the brain. Okay. All right. Okay, so I want to just sort of next turn to some a discussion about brain structural and functional development, and just kind of like laying the groundwork of some of the fundamentals of brain sort of maturation, right? So I'm going to advance, talk a little bit about some of these normative changes in brain structure and function during this time period, right? Just as an aside, developmental cognitive neuroscience is interested in both sort of typically developing and atypical development in brain and behavior, right? Oftentimes, we can better understand atypical development by understanding typical development, normative development, right? To understand sort of what is atypical, we have to first establish what is normative, right? And so so oftentimes the atypical and normative studies sort of go hand in hand and inform each other, right? Okay, so I'm going to show you a picture in the next slide here, and I want you to see if you can tell me which of these images is an adolescent brain and which of them is from an adult. I'll give you a few seconds to sort of think about it and look at some of the detail. Everybody have your choice? They're literally the same picture, right? And the reason I showed you this, right, is not to trick you, but to sort of demonstrate this idea that the adolescent brain, sort of at a macro level, looks very, very, very similar to an adult brain, right? Um, by the time you are about like seven, somewhere between like the ages of 7 to 9, sometimes 7 to 11, um, the human brain is about 95% of the size as an adult, right? Um, the degree of cortical folding, sort of the bumps and ridges that we see in the brain, which is a process called gyrification, is also at adult levels by the second decade of life, right? But we know that the adolescent brain, functions a bit differently than the adult, right? Anybody that's spent time around teenagers can attest to this, right? Um, and so what is it about the adolescent brain that makes it function differently? Well, the difference is changes in the brain's sort of microstructure, right? The way that the neurons communicate with each other and the way that the neurons themselves are sort of their morphology and their sort of their anatomical characteristics. Okay, so there are two sort of major microstructural changes that have been given a lot of attention in developmental cognitive neuroscience science, and that is what's called a process called synaptic pruning and a process called myelination. Okay, so synaptic pruning is essentially the loss of unnecessary connections between neurons. Right. So on the right-hand side of this image, I have two sort of cartoon neurons, right? And we know that neurons communicate with each other through like electrochemical signaling, right? And that the signal travels from a cell body down this fiber called the axon and terminates in at the synapse, right? The synapse is this connection between one neuron and another, right? Um, when an electrical signal travels down, it causes the release of chemicals like neurotransmitters at the synapse, which then travel across this space and attach to receptors on the receiving neuron, right? And depending upon the particular combination of signals that come in, it can then cause neuron B here to fire an action potential to signal to the next neuron in the row or not, right? Now, there are lots and lots and lots of connections, right, between neurons in your brain at the synapses. And as we grow and as we develop, these synapses are sort of constantly being pruned, right? Connections in pathways that we don't necessarily need all the time are lost. Connections in pathways that underlie behaviors that are very pertinent, germane to what we're doing, at that time, are strengthened, right? And so this happens all the time, but there are particular periods in development when we see sort of massive growth of synapses and massive synaptic pruning, right? So I'll talk about the synaptic pruning here a bit more in the next couple of slides. The other kind of microstructural maturation that is that's relevant to adolescent development, in particular, is called myelination. Now, myelination is essentially putting insulation around this fiber, this axon, this long fiber that comes from this one neuron cell body down to another, right? And you can think of this as essentially these are fatty sheaths that are sort of laid down by supporting cells in the brain. And what they effectively do is that they insulate the myelin, or they insulate the axon, right? The myelin acts as an insulatory agent. And so just like you would put insulation on a copper wire, right? What that does is it helps speed the electrical transmission of signal from one neuron to the next neuron, right? And it increases sort of the signal fidelity too. So signals aren't lost along the way. So it increases speed and it increases signal fidelity of information transfer. Okay. So these are two really kind of key processes that happen, microstructural processes that happen, and that are you know believed to significantly underlie a lot of changes in brain function um, and subsequent behavior during the adolescent years. Okay, we'll talk a little bit more about pruning. So as I mentioned, when we're first born, um, soon after we're first born, we get this sort of explosion of synapses, right? This sort of massive growth of connections between neurons in our brain, right? Over time, um, the connections that we use in a particular environment, or a particular individual requires, those connections are strengthened, and connections that are sort of superfluous or not necessary for a particular environment are lost through pruning, right? Um, this is a process, again, I mentioned it goes along, sort of your whole life. Um, these are some images from an early paper that looked at postmortem brain tissue at various sort of stages of development from the newborn up through 6 years in the same part of the brain. And you can see how, there are changes, same number of neurons, so the same number of these sort of big black blobs here, right? But the connections between them differ across time, right? So there's sort of this increased proliferation of synapses, of connections between neurons, from 3 to 6 months and into about 2 years or so, and then followed by pruning, followed by this sort of the establishment of which circuits are crucial for that individual, and which are not, right? And so we see this sort of gradual thinning of this area of the brain, right, relative to younger ages. Now, this work that I'm showing you here came from the lab of a scientist named Peter Huttenlocher, who did some really groundbreaking work, like in the late 80s, early 1990s. And truthfully, some very painstaking work where we actually counted the number of synapses in slices of postmortem brain tissue, right? And one of the really interesting sort of findings of this is that the rate of synaptic pruning differs according to different spatial locations in the brain, right? So here, this is sort of sort of an image that shows the density of synapses across time in an area of like sort of primary visual cortex, so a sensory system here in the dotted line, right? And then prefrontal cortex, which is in the dark red line, right? So this sort of peak in density and the progression of the progression of decrease in synaptic density, which is reflective of synaptic pruning, right, occurs at sort of different rates in different brain areas. This has been expanded. This sort of initial work in postmortem tissue has been expanded using some pretty sophisticated techniques in fMRI, where we can actually measure the thickness of cortex, right? And so on this next image, I want to show you some videos that show changes in the thickness of cortex across time. So this is a sort of a top view of a brain. This is the right hemisphere. This is the left hemisphere. And this is sort of a side view of the brain. So the eyeballs would be like right here, and it's looking down this way. Okay, if it was situated in the head. This is the front. This is the back of the brain, top, bottom. And the thickness that is depicted by colors, right? So areas that are sort of in these hot colors are thicker. Areas in the cooler colors down here are thinner, right? And so as I play this image, what you can see is there's this sort of this gradual progression, and this is a montage of images from about age 5 to about age 20, right? So in the very beginning of this, 5, it's about the teen years, and 20, right? So the brain across the brain gets progressively thinner, but there are still a lot of regional differences, right? Both in terms of the rate and the sort of the endpoint in adulthood, right? Here's another image, again, showing this sort of progression, right? Play it again. One kind of interesting, notable thing. So I would say that this is approximately, move this over here. This is somewhere in the adolescent range, right about here, right? And one of the things you can see, right, is that areas that are like primary motor cortex, primary visual cortex, these areas that are sort of serving basic functions, right, are adult-like relatively early, but areas that underlie sort of more complex functions like abstract reasoning and integration, areas like the prefrontal cortex, which I'm circling here, right, are still maturing into adolescence and into young adulthood, right? Okay. So this is sort of just the image of this. This is from way back in 2004. But what I'm circling here is about the adolescent brain, right? The teen brain. And again, you can see there is progressive changes into adulthood, differences across regions, but there are regions, particularly in these sort of more executive function type areas, that are still maturing. Okay. um, I'm noticing my time here, and I'm going to try to speed up a little bit, but I might skip over a few slides just for sake of, so we have some time for questions and stuff at the end. This other process, myelination, that I mentioned, this is sort of the putting the insulation on neurons, right, to allow them to communicate with each other more quickly and with higher fidelity, right? Interestingly, myelination occurs roughly linearly across the lifespan, right? So we sort of we see progressive increases in myelination across time, whereas in like synaptic density, we see this sort of peak, right? We see sort of a growth of synapses followed by pruning and the decline. Myelination sort of roughly increases linearly across childhood and into adulthood. There are regional differences, however, right? So some regions are myelinated more quickly than others, but the overall progression is roughly linear, right? And one of the kind of the key points to kind of take home here is that developmental cognitive neuroscientist has demonstrated that these sort of progressive changes in myelination and synaptic pruning, these sort of microstructural refinements, right, are really thought to underlie in a very key way changes in the way the brain is sort of functionally organized, right? And I want to show you this image. This is a very complex, very busy slide here, right? But what this is showing is different areas of the brain and how they're connected with each other at about 8, about 13, and about at age 25. Okay. And I've expanded this image just so we can kind of see it in a little bit more detail, right? Well, the investigators here, they were basically looking at activation in sort of specific regions of the brain and how that activation was correlated or similar to other areas of the brain, right? And so each one of these little circles represents an area of the brain, and the outside color, there's like an inside color and an outside color. The outside color reflects like where in the brain, like the lobe of the brain, where that region comes from. So we have, areas in frontal lobe and parietal lobe and temporal lobe and the cerebellum. And then the inside color, right, refers to functional networks that sort of emerge across time. Okay, so what I want to show you next is again another sort of video here, but what this is showing is changes in the pattern of how brain areas sort of communicate with each other and relate to each other across time. Okay, and my computer's a little bit slow. It's usually a little bit more, a little smoother than this. But what we see, right, and this has been demonstrated across labs, what we see is a change from some brain areas sort of being most related to areas that are close by to themselves, to an organization structure where sort of more distal, more separated regions communicate and function as networks, right? So we start to see, it's probably the best if I just show this again. In the children relative to the adults, right? The areas that are closest together are areas that sort of are in the same anatomical location, right? But as we mature, the areas that are closer together that show the most sort of common function are areas that are sort of that function together in these sort of underlying networks, right? And so we have this sort of this basic pattern of sort of decreased local connections and increased sort of integration of areas that that again function as networks and oftentimes function together to support specific kinds of behavior. Okay, so this is a very sort of rapid overview of some of these fundamental things, but again, these sort of changes in the way that our brain is organized, right, are believed to be supported by these microstructural changes, these changes in how quickly or efficiently neurons can communicate with each other, changes in the way that sort of neurons connect with other neurons locally through synaptic pruning. Right? Okay, so I'm gonna sort of next turn to some sort of more contemporary frameworks, research areas, and trends. And I want to sort of go back to our this idea of risk taking, right? So risk taking as sort of a concept has been a really sort of major driver of research in developmental cognitive neuroscience. Um, it has sort of been a sort of a model behavior that people have been very interested in. Indeed, people have been interested in adolescent risk behavior, since from the dawn of time, it seems like, right? There's writings from Aristotle and Plato about adolescence and their risk, predilection. Shakespeare has writings about, adolescence and sort of, their impulsivity and their how their behavior is driven by passions and so forth, right? But if we sort of take a modern perspective on this, right, there have been a few sort of advancements in terms of how we understand risk based on our sort of increasing understanding of brain structural and functional development, right? Some of these sort of the major kind of like models, the major sort of explanatory frameworks are relatively simple in terms of their presentation, but there's a sort of a lot to them. The major sort of heuristic or sort of rule of thumb models of adolescent risk taking is that there are sort of developmental mismatches between reward and social emotional brain systems and executive control or cognitive control systems. And the essence is that during adolescence, there is sort of increased or heightened sensitivity in social emotional and reward systems that occurs in sort of the context of a sort of a still developing cognitive control system in the brain, right? So, you know, cognitive control here is indicated by the straight line, right? So it sort of progressively increases over time, according to some models, whereas this sort of social emotional reward system shows this sort of heightened peak during adolescence, right? And it's this sort of this space here, right? This sort of where the rewards oftentimes outweigh, right, our ability to sort of control our behavior in the context of rewards, right? There have been modifications of this more recently, with a bit more sort of, informed by better understanding of sort of the actual developmental trajectories of cognitive control systems. But the basic idea is, again, that there is a developmental mismatch between rewards, and particularly rewards that are that take on increased salience in certain contexts, and are sort of where adolescents are at in terms of their ability to sort of control or exert executive control or cognitive control over their behavior. Right? Um, the and as I mentioned, like in risk, and as mentioned earlier in the talk, a lot of times like this sort of heightened reward, activation or responsivity is in the presence of peers, right? And so these models also kind of tell us about the importance of context, right? So the adolescent drivers took more risks when they were in the context of a peer watching them, right? And a lot of work in developmental cognitive neuroscience over the past like 10 years or so has really been focused on understanding these sort of dynamics and transactions between the developing brain, right, and the microstructural changes and all that stuff, and the environment or the context, right? And so just as a kind of an example, over the last several years, you know, context has sort of been defined differently, but has been, again, related to brain maturation. So contexts like early life stress, so peer victimization, family violence, neighborhood violence, these types of things, right, has been linked to changes in the brain and maturation. Social peer interactions, nutrition, media use. Some of our own work in the lab has looked at like the effects of sleep and sleep contexts on brain function, and risk for psychopathology, for example. Um, Lots of work has also been focused on what's referred to as the exposome. This sort of concept of the exposome has been introduced to developmental cognitive neuroscience. And the exposome is a term that was coined some time ago, but it really sort of reflects sort of the totality of environmental exposure, right, that an individual might experience across their lifespan. And so, developmental cognitive neuroscience, given this sort of really, uh, the importance of context in understanding, brain development, has really started looking at multiple areas of this exposome and how they relate to brain development and behavior, and sort of these transactions between brain and context. Some of our own work, actually, in the Center for Developmental Science, is sort of pursuing these questions as well. We have an ongoing study that's looking at that's studying rural families, and we go to people's homes. We do a deep characterization of like of their homes, their family interactions, neighborhoods, things like this. And we also bring them onto campus and look at brain connectivity patterns, right, and how their brains are sort of functionally configured. And we're looking for links between brain structure, context, and risk and resilience, right? Particularly risk for like substance use. I know I'm running a little bit low on time here, so I want to I'm just going to kind of go through just real quickly these some sort of trends and some new areas in dev cog neuro. One of the there's and you may have heard of this. It's been in media, and it's been reported on quite a bit. There's a massive study undergoing that's currently undergoing right now, across multiple like universities in the United States. It's called the Adolescent Brain and Cognitive Development Study. This is it's a sample of individuals and their families, starting from age 9 to 10, and it's a longitudinal study, so they're planning on studying these individuals and bringing them back for assessments for 10 years, taking things like brain data and biospecimens and all kinds of substance use questionnaires and mental health questionnaires and assessments of family and the whole kitchen sink, right? And the idea is to develop this sort of large, nationally representative data set that we can use to sort of better understand causal links between like brain structure and function and behavior and various kinds of outcomes like substance use, mental health, um, and really sort of get a good understanding of how the adolescent brain is developing in context. Right? This has been an extremely rich data set. The first data release was in 2018, and since 2018, there's been more than 1,500 papers that have been written off of this data set. It has really kind of been a major part of the conversation in developmental cognitive neuroscience research, spurred a lot of really interesting studies and methodological innovation. Sort of big data science kind of like helped us answer a lot of questions related to sort of obtaining and working with like humongous data sets, right? I'm going to kind of close with just a couple of quick sentences on sort of how I think about like the future of DCN and sort of our area in this area of adolescent, brain development. Obviously the ABCD study is going to continue on for some time. That is going to, drive a big part of the conversation and, how we use those data. But we're also, a part of the conversation for sort of the future of DCN is also going to be how we integrate things like artificial intelligence, various data science techniques into understanding increasingly complex data, right? Data that incorporates like multiple environmental contexts, multiple biological contexts, social interactions, and so forth, right? There's been a lot of advancement even in the last like year, 2 years in the tools that we use in developmental cognitive neuroscience. So things like higher resolution scanners, different ways of sort of analyzing and looking at sort of the brain sort of in situ, right, in the actual head, right, and how it develops across time. These are just, I'm not going to talk about this, but these are just some examples of some of the ways that we've been using it, in some of our sort of methodological sort of applications of data using complex stat analyses like independent component analysis, multi-level modeling. We're using down to like the individual level, trying to understand time varying effect modeling in the brain. So really kind of spanning from like population neuroscientist science all the way down to like the individual, right? And really, this is, I think, is really kind of like the key for developmental science in the future is and adolescent developmental science in the future is sort of thinking about ways that we can sort of effectively leverage these large data sets, integrating them with sort of more smaller but more methodologically sort of precise and sometimes rigorous lab-based studies, right? To really kind of like sort of co-inform each other, right? So we have these sort of like smaller data sets where we can sort of develop hypotheses that we can test in larger data sets and vice versa. We will, continue to see methodological sophistication, analytic sophistication, I think, in adolescent development. Again, developmental cognitive neuroscience and developmental science in general oftentimes lead sort of the scientific community in terms of method development because the data that we're looking at is so complex, right? And we have to have like sort of algorithms and software and statistical approaches that sort of match that complexity, right? And then finally, all this information that we're gathering, all this complex and predictive information and needs to be used for good, right? And we need to use these data to all this sort of information about brain and context and leverage it for to inform policy, education, prevention, intervention. And there's a lot of work in that space being done now, and I see this continuing in the future. So. All right, so I am over time, but thank you for your attention. I know I covered a lot of ground. Um, Believe it or not, I've kind of just scratched the surface of DevCog Neuro. There's so much more to talk about, and I am happy to connect with anybody outside of this if they want to. Feel free to email me. You can also check out our Center for Developmental Science website. It has a description of some of the projects that we're doing, some of the directions. Yeah, and I'm happy to take any questions if folks are able to stick around.
Chuck, thank you so much. Some of this was familiar to me, some of this was new to me, even though I do some of the guiding of this teaching about brain development initiative. So appreciate so much your taking time to share. I'm going to go ahead and drop the link for the evaluation of the presentation, which is also where you can request a certificate if you're interested. So those of you who need to go, be sure you grab that link first. If anybody has questions, you are at this point, you're welcome to unmute if you'd like to ask a question, or drop questions in the chat, whichever's easier for you. And thank you all for being here, and thank you for your attention.
Yeah, thank you so much. I saw one question in the chat. It says imaging is also being used for senior adults, looking in sort of brain functioning and structural and functional relation to dementia. And yes, absolutely. Like, so fMRI is and structural MRI and sort of all the variants that we can kind of types of images that we can get from that has been used really across the lifespan. It's been used, initially, in sort of young adults, right? But it has expanded. It's used to like adolescents and children, and the other end of the age span, right? And adults. A lot of work has focused on like identification of uh, proteins and like deposits of protein like tau protein in certain areas of the brain, and how those proteins impact like functioning, right? Like functional activation. fMRI has also been used to study brain connectivity in utero in unborn babies, which is really fascinating. There's a whole sort of subfield in developmental cognitive neuroscience that is really trying to understand from the earliest ages, how the brain communicates, with itself, and how it sort of relates to the the environment in which it finds itself. Yeah. Can diet affect myelination? Yes. So there are lots of things that can affect myelination in the brain. Yes, diet seems to be one thing. So it's a lipid sheath that wraps around the axon, and so specific kinds of of lipids and amino acids and proteins and things like this are very important in terms of sort of overall brain health and and these microstructural processes that are happening as well. There's some work from folks in our college that have really been interested in understanding like nutrition and diet and brain structural development, looking at things like inflammation in the brain and maybe some precursors to like maladaptive eating patterns, obesity, so things like this. Yeah, so diet and what we do, right, like behaviorally, and what we consume can 100% impact our brain and in some cases directly affect these microstructural processes, right?
Thank you again, Chuck. We really appreciate it. I'm going to stop the recording. We can stay on a
Sure.
couple more minutes in case people want to ask other questions.